The world had died screaming. Daniel Cole had seen it happen, how civilization collapsed in a matter of weeks, the infection spreading faster than any government could contain. He had survived by luck, by instinct, and by sheer unwillingness to die. Now, 2 years later, he walked alone through the skeletal remains of a once thriving city, his rifle slung over his shoulder and a machete hanging at his hip. The streets of Denver were unrecognizable. Cars sat abandoned in eternal gridlocks, their windows smashed, their frames rusting. The air was thick with the scent of decay, rotting bodies, damp asphalt, and the distant smoke of a fire that had long since burned out. Buildings loomed over him like silent tombstones, their shattered windows staring down at him like the eyes of the dead. Daniel kept his steps light, his breathing steady. Noise attracted them. The infected. They weren't the slow, mindless husks from old horror movies. No, these things were fast, hunters. Some were little more than rotting corpses, but others, the fresh ones, were quick, agile, and terrifyingly persistent. He had seen them scale walls, crash through barricades, and run for miles without tiring. He needed supplies. The last safe zone he'd holed up in had been overrun 2 nights ago. He barely made it out with the gear on his back. Now, hunger gnawed at him, and the single water bottle he carried was running dangerously low. His best bet was an old grocery store up ahead. It had been raided before, but maybe, just maybe, there was something left. He crouched low as he approached the store, his grip tightening around his machete. The glass doors had been shattered, leaving jagged shards clinging to the frame. Bloodstains darkened the tile floor inside, smeared handprints marking the walls like desperate warnings. Daniel stepped inside, moving carefully. Shelves had been stripped bare, wrappers and broken cans littering the ground. A rat scurried past his foot, making him tense. He took a slow breath. If the infected were inside, he'd hear them before he saw them. He moved toward the back where the storage room was. The door was slightly ajar. That wasn't a good sign. He nudged it open with the tip of his machete, muscles coiled, ready to strike. A corpse lay inside. Or at least, what had once been a person. It was fresh, no more than a day or 2 old. The smell of blood and death filled the room. But what sent a chill through Daniel's spine wasn't the body. It was the can of food clutched in the dead man's hand. Someone else had been here recently. And they might still be here. A sound. Soft, but unmistakable. The scrape of a shoe against tile. Daniel spun, just in time to see a figure dart through the aisles. Not an infected, too controlled, too deliberate. Another survivor. He hesitated. People were more dangerous than the undead. The living had reason, motive, desperation. Another noise. This one from outside. A distant, guttural moan. Daniel swore under his breath. The city was waking up. And the dead were coming. Daniel didn't have time to think. The distant moan grew into a chorus, dozens of them, maybe more. The infected had caught his scent, or maybe the other survivors. Either way, they were coming. He sprinted toward the shattered storefront, pausing just long enough to see the shadow of someone disappearing around the corner of a nearby alley. He cursed. Whoever it was had led the horde straight to him. The first of the dead staggered into view. A woman, or what was left of her, her face half-eaten, teeth bared in a grotesque grin. She shrieked, her body twitching violently before launching toward him with unnatural speed. Daniel didn't hesitate. He swung the machete, the blade sinking deep into her skull. He wrenched it free, barely ducking in time as 2 more came barreling through the wreckage of a burned-out sedan. Too many. He ran. His boots pounded against cracked asphalt as he weaved through the ruined city. Behind him, the shrieks and howls of the infected echoed through the streets. They were relentless, their hunger insatiable. Daniel spotted an overturned truck and vaulted over it, landing hard on the other side. A chain-link fence loomed ahead, his only chance. He sheathed his machete and started climbing, fingers gripping the rusted metal as the first of the infected slammed into the fence below. The barrier rattled violently, but he didn't look down. If he did, panic would set in. He swung his leg over the top and dropped onto the other side, rolling to absorb the impact. He didn't stop. He ran through an overgrown alley, past abandoned storefronts, until he finally reached the outskirts of the city. The ruins gave way to cracked highways and fields of rusted cars. Only then did he slow down, gasping for breath. The horde was still behind him, but they were slower now, some losing interest. He had to keep moving. And then he heard it. A voice. Weak, uncertain. "Hey! Stop!" Daniel spun, his heart still pounding. It was the survivor from earlier. A young girl, no older than 15, standing at the entrance of an old gas station. She had a rifle, though she held it awkwardly, like she didn't really know how to use it. Behind her, in the shadows of the building, a man stirred, a soldier, judging by the tattered remains of his uniform. Daniel exhaled. He wasn't alone anymore. Daniel didn't lower his guard. The girl had a rifle, but the way she held it, too stiff, her finger nervously twitching near the trigger, told him she wasn't used to violence. The man behind her, however, was different. Taller, broad-shouldered, with sharp eyes that had seen too much. His clothes were worn, military fatigues faded with time and blood. A deep wound stretched across his arm, hastily wrapped in dirty bandages. He was hurt. The girl spoke first. You led them here." Her voice wavered, but there was steel underneath. Daniel glanced over his shoulder. The horde was still coming, shambling over wreckage, their shrieks rising again as they spotted movement. "Yeah," he said flatly, "and if we don't move, we all die." The soldier grunted, pushing himself up from where he had been resting against a rusted gas pump. "Emma, put the gun down." His voice was rough, but there was authority in it. The girl hesitated, then lowered the rifle slightly, still ready, but no longer pointing at Daniel's chest. "I'm Harris," the man said, wincing as he straightened. "And right now, I don't care who you are, just help me get this door open before we're all lunch." Daniel had questions, too many, but there was no time. He rushed forward and helped Harris shove open the station's metal door. The rusted hinges screeched, but they managed to get inside. Emma slipped in after them, slamming it shut just as the first of the infected reached the station. Bang! A grotesque face slammed against the glass window, blackened teeth snapping. More bodies followed, clawing at the door, their moans growing into a deafening wail. "We won't last in here," Daniel said, scanning the dark interior. The place had been picked clean long ago, empty shelves, shattered glass, old bloodstains. There was no way out except the door they had just barricaded. "We have a car," Emma blurted. "Or we did. It's out back, but it won't start." Harris swayed slightly, exhaustion creeping in. "Alternator shot. We were trying to fix it when you showed up." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. They were stuck in a death trap, with no working vehicle, an injured soldier, and a girl who barely knew how to use a gun. Fantastic. "All right," he exhaled. "Let's make a deal. If I help fix your car, I get a ride out of here." Emma looked at Harris, but the man barely hesitated. "Fine." A fist smashed against the door. Cracks spiderwebbed through the glass. They had minutes. Daniel grabbed his machete. "Then let's get to work." The station wouldn't hold for long. The glass cracked under the relentless pounding of the undead, fractures splitting wider with each brutal impact. Daniel tightened his grip on his machete. "Back door, now." Emma helped Harris to his feet, his face pale from blood loss. They moved fast, slipping through the storage room and out into the rear lot. The car sat in the open, a rusted SUV with its hood already popped. Daniel took one look at the engine and swore under his breath. Harris wasn't kidding. The alternator was fried. "Can you fix it?" Emma asked, her voice tight with panic. Daniel shook his head. "Not without a replacement." A shriek cut through the air. The infected were pouring out of the alley, drawn by the noise. They scrambled over dumpsters and clawed toward them with unholy speed. "Then we're dead," Harris muttered. Daniel's mind raced. There was another way. Risky, but better than waiting to be torn apart. "The highway," he said quickly. There were abandoned military convoys. "Those trucks might have parts we need." Harris exhaled sharply. "Or they might have more of them. It's that or die here." A moment passed. Then, with a nod, Harris shoved a handgun into Emma's hands. "You stick with Daniel. Do what he says." He looked at Daniel. "You get her back alive." Daniel didn't argue. With the horde closing in, they sprinted toward the highway. The highway was a graveyard of vehicles. Rusted tanks, troop transports, and Humvees littered the road, remnants of a failed military evacuation. Most were stripped bare, but Daniel knew there had to be something useful. "Cover me," he told Emma as he climbed onto the hood of a wrecked truck, wrenching open the engine bay. His hands worked fast, yanking out what he needed. Then he heard it. Not the infected. Voices. Emma tensed, gripping her rifle as a group of men stepped into view. 5 of them, dressed in mismatched armor, rifles slung across their shoulders. Raiders. Well, one of them sneered. "Didn't think we'd get a bonus haul today." Daniel slowly reached for his machete. "We don't want trouble." The leader smirked. "See, that's the thing. You walked into our yard. That means you're ours now." A gunshot rang out. Emma had fired first, her hands trembling but her aim true. One of the raiders crumpled, clutching his leg. Chaos erupted. Daniel lunged forward, slashing through the nearest attacker as Emma scrambled for cover. The raiders fired back, but the noise was their mistake. Because something else had heard it. A guttural howl echoed across the highway. The infected were coming. And they weren't stopping for anyone. Gunfire ripped through the air, but it wasn't the bullets Daniel feared, it was the sound. The shrieks of the infected grew deafening as they poured onto the highway, drawn by the chaos. The raiders panicked. One tried to flee but was tackled mid-stride, his screams cut short as teeth tore into flesh. Another fired wildly before a monstrous figure lunged at him, dragging him down beneath a frenzy of clawing hands. Daniel grabbed Emma's arm. "Run!" She didn't hesitate. They weaved through the wreckage, the howls of the dying raiders fading beneath the deafening wails of the horde. Daniel still clutched the salvaged alternator in one hand, his machete in the other. The SUV was their only hope. They burst out of the highway ruins, sprinting toward the gas station. Harris stood waiting at the back in trance, his rifle raised. Relief flickered in his eyes, but it was short-lived. Behind them, the swarm was still coming. "Get in the car!" Daniel barked. Harris helped Emma inside as Daniel rushed to the engine. His fingers worked fast, hands shaking as he installed the replacement part. The infected were closing in, dozens of them, their bodies moving in twisted, unnatural jerks. "Daniel!" Emma screamed. He slammed the hood shut. "Try it!" The engine groaned, sputtered, then roared to life. Daniel yanked the door open and dove inside just as the first infected slammed against the vehicle. Harris floored the gas pedal. The SUV lurched forward, plowing through the crowd of undead. Bodies crunched beneath the wheels, hands clawing at the windows as they sped toward the open road. They didn't stop. Not until the city disappeared in the rearview mirror, swallowed by smoke and the distant echoes of the dead. Hours later, they reached the mountains. The bunker was close, Emma swore it existed, hidden deep within the ruins of an old government facility. But as they arrived, Daniel felt the first sting of doubt. The entrance was sealed, massive steel doors locked tight. Skeletons littered the ground, their bones bleached by time. Bloodstains streaked the walls, desperate handprints clawing for escape. Something had gone terribly wrong here. Emma's breath hitched. No, it was supposed to be safe. Harris's expression darkened. "We're too late." Daniel stared at the bunker, jaw clenched. No supplies. No safe haven. And no way back. Behind them, in the distance, the first howls of the infected rose once more. The nightmare wasn't over. The bunker was supposed to be their salvation. Instead, it was a tomb. Daniel scanned the steel doors, searching for any sign of life. Nothing. The keypad beside the entrance was shattered, its wires exposed, long corroded by time. Bloodstains covered the walls, signs of a last stand that had long since been lost. Emma stood frozen, her hands trembling. They were supposed to be here. My brother, he told me. Harris rested a hand on her shoulder, his face grim. He didn't make it, kid. Daniel clenched his jaw. There was no time for grief. The infected were coming. The echoes of their shrieks carried through the valley, growing louder. Closer. He turned to Harris. Options? The soldier exhaled. We fight, or we run. Daniel looked around. The mountain terrain gave them no easy escape. The road was too exposed. The only cover was the dense forest stretching beyond the bunker. But the woods were dangerous, the infected could be anywhere. He made his decision. The trees. We lose them in the trees. Harris nodded, already moving. Emma wiped her eyes and followed, gripping her rifle tight. They ran. The forest swallowed them whole, shadows stretching long beneath the setting sun. Branches cracked under their boots, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind them, the infected poured into the trees, their shrieks piercing the silence. Daniel didn't stop. They leapt over fallen logs, weaved through thick brush, their only hope to outlast the monsters that hunted them. Then, gunfire. Not from them. Daniel skidded to a halt, signaling the others to get down. Through the trees, he saw them, figures in tattered uniforms, barricaded in a ruined outpost. Survivors. One of them spotted the approaching horde. Get inside, now. Harris didn't hesitate. He grabbed Emma's wrist and ran for the gate. Daniel covered their flank, hacking down an infected that lunged from the darkness. Bullets rained down as the survivors opened fire, thinning the herd. The gates groaned open just long enough for them to slip inside before slamming shut behind them. Silence. The horde snarled from the other side, clawing uselessly at the barricade. Daniel turned, taking in the faces of the people who had just saved them. Battle-worn. Scarred. But alive. A man stepped forward, rifle slung over his back. His voice was rough but steady. You're either real lucky or real stupid. He glanced at Harris's uniform. Military? Harris nodded. Once. The man studied them for a moment, then gestured toward the camp. You need food, shelter, but if you stay, you work. No dead weight. Daniel exhaled. They weren't out of danger. Not yet. But for the first time in years, survival didn't feel like a losing battle. He met the man's gaze. We can pull our weight. The man smirked. Good. Outside, the infected wailed, unable to reach them. For now, at least, they had found something that had been lost for far too long. Hope. The end.